This is the Bama Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today, I am joined by Elle Grover-Fricks to finish out this series by turning our attention to two figures in the book of Revelation.
That's right. They're probably familiar to us, but sometimes they kind of get passed over in the way that we read Revelation of, well, okay, that's a little odd, but anyway... On to chapter 21, right?
There's a lot of weird stuff in Revelation, so
there is so many helicopters, but Bama listeners know better. But we're going to slow down and really take our time in these passages together. So let's dig in. We're going to start with Revelation 17. Get the sketchier content out the way, and then get to a little bit more positive, happy content to finish out the series. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Great. What do you read for us? Revelation 17.
And I'm reading from the RSV this time because Elle has grown weary of me saying in RSV UE, which, to be fair, I have grown weary of it as well. So here we are in the RSV. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who is seated upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and with the wine of whose fornication the dwellers on earth have become drunk." And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and bedecked with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her fornication. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. So far, so good.
Yes, cruising.
When I saw her, I marveled greatly, but the angel said to me, "Why marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is to ascend." Okay, all right. I was like, wait a minute. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is to ascend from the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And the dwellers on earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will marvel to behold the beast, because it was, and is not, and is to come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. Indeed it does, Elle. That is why I'm looking to you in a moment. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. They are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, and the other has not yet come. Mm-hmm. And when he comes, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to perdition. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. If you could only be king for 1 hour... what would you do? These are of one mind and give over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. And he said to me, "The waters that you saw, where the harlot is seated, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the harlot. They will make her desolate and naked, and devour her flesh, and burn her up with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind, and giving over their royal power to the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman that you saw is the great city, which has dominion over the kings of the earth."
This is the word of the Lord. I have to confess that when you were making allusions to my wisdom, which was very kind, I was trying to think of a way to make a Marvel joke about why Marvel. So not really the height of wisdom.
I can roll with that. This passage does contain my Revelation curiosity. What was the language that he used? peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And so that's translated different ways. But I think there's 4 different times that set of 4 things occurs, but every time it occurs in Revelation is in a different order.
Ooh.
Which I've always been intrigued by. And I suspect that that's not why you're here today to answer my question, but I just want to point out that is still in my mind.
Alas,
every
yes,
time I look at
I
Revelation.
have no answers. That is very curious. Thanks for pointing it out. I'm sure someone will scamper down that little path you just laid out.
I mean, I pointed it out when we went through Revelation in session 4 and nobody got back to me.
It's been a while. It's fine. Okay, so this is a curious chapter, right? It has some kind of dubious content, right? That we might not normally preach about on Sundays. And then also, it's one of those interesting places where it contains an interpretation, right? Like sometimes Jesus tells a parable and then right after he's like, this is actually what it means. But then there's still questions and we're like, well, that doesn't really explain everything the way I kind of hoped for. So we're going to do the thing that we like to do where we presume that, the text is inspired. Wow. And so the the details matter. And that the original recipients of the text had some idea about what was going on, right? All of these things meant something to them. So we're going to dig into some of these details and see what we can see. But how do we usually talk about this female character? Brent?
How do we typically talk about her?
Yep. What's she about? What's this passage about?
I mean, she's a terrible person.
Sure. Yeah. She's bad.
All sorts of abominations and fornications and all the shuns.
All the Asians. Yeah. You're bad one. You're in Asian territory. Yeah, absolutely. Everybody can enjoy their own little, if you have a subtitle at the head of your pericope, there'll be some pretty interesting renderings of who she is, there. And so we're going to do a little bit of a different angle, surprise, surprise, than we might be used to. But the typical reading, just to lay it out, is that this woman represents Rome and Babylon, right? That's why it says Babylon. That's kind of the archetypal evil empire. And we've got like the 7 hills represent Rome. And so this is all about the spiritual seduction of empire, of moving people away from following God to following this dominant world system. And she emblemizes, is that a word? Symbolizes material gain, greed. She's dressed in this very luxurious outfit, right? And so it's about seeking out the base desires and vanity over the needs of the oppressed minority, right? That's kind of our typical reading. And it's not, completely without merit. I'm not going to throw out all of that there. I'm just going to try to turn our attention to a couple of different details and help us think maybe a little bit more, with more complexity about this character. I'm not trying to go through and take all of like the bad female characters in the text, and be like, actually, they were really good. Jezebel's like my hero. That's not the vibe. That's not the intention. But
and to be fair, nobody forgets about Jezebel.
Nobody forgets
she gets
about
brought
Jezebel
up all the time.
She does. Yeah, she's quite the character. But okay, so if this character is all about seduction, right, on a spiritual level, of course, I want to kind of interrogate that idea firstly. If she is supposed to be this person who's magnetizing God's people to herself, and that's why she's kind of evil, her posture is interesting because she's stated as doing what? What's she actually doing in this pericope, in this section?
She's sitting on the beast.
Yeah, she's sitting there. Can you read Proverbs 5 3 through 6? Proverbs 5, 3 through 6. And this is about the woman of folly that we've referenced in previous episodes, who does epitomize, seductive behavior. What's she doing in those verses?
For the lips of a loose woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end, she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps follow the path to Sheol. She does not take heed to the path of life. Her ways wander, and she does not know it.
Right. Okay. So she's pretty active in this section. There's lots of other sections we can look at, but she's talking. She has smooth words that then turn out to be poisonous. She's walking or running on this path to, basically hell, and abjuring or saying, she's paying no heed, I think that translation said, to the paths of life. So that's pretty active comparatively. And other spots, she's like languid in a doorway, calling out to the people passing by, in contrast to the woman of wisdom who is standing right in all these different spots, also calling out. So she's a pretty active character. She's doing stuff. She's asking people to pay attention to her. She's leading them in bad paths, right? And in contrast, this woman is just sitting there. Which is interesting. So we're going to talk more about the beast in the next section, because he shows up in Revelation 12 as well. So just focusing on the details of this particular woman. Okay, so she's sitting. She's wearing robes, right? She's clothed in purple and scarlet. Purple, of course, is what color?
Royalty, I guess.
Yeah,
but I'm also seeing a lot of like tabernacle sort of stuff. Spoiler for Josh's series that hasn't come out yet, but
yeah, there are some colors there. Tabernacle obviously predates Imperial Rome, only coming up after Caesar. But she's wearing this imperial color, which was outlawed for quite some time before people just really wanted to wear it because, classism and wanting to be fancy. And so eventually enough people were squeaking by that they were like, fine, other people can wear it. But she's wearing an imperial color because this is a Roman image, right? And then she's also wearing scarlet. So the way that you could make that color was by mining cinnabar. All of the mining at that time was done by slaves, by prisoners of war that had been taken from the Roman conquest, right? That's why ancient Rome was continually expanding, because they were adding to their slave population, which their economy was built on. Which, sidebar, by the way, normally I am like, Wikipedia. It's the best starting point. Like, it's got so much good stuff in there. When I was in school, especially undergrad, everyone was like, don't trust Wikipedia. And it's like, no, Wikipedia is great. However, whenever you are studying ancient Rome, be much more careful of Wikipedia, because there's a large fan community of ancient Rome out there. They've got kind of the spirit of people who are like, no, Christopher Nolan's Batman is the best one of all time. I'm like, okay, all right, cool guys.
I mean, yeah.
And
sure. That's not a debate we have time to get into.
I mean, a different podcast, perhaps. But it's that kind of same energy. And they quote in Wikipedia all of these historians. So you feel like you're reading the voice of the primary sources instead of the voice of these people who are trying to argue that Rome is the best empire of all time. But the problem is those elite historians are from one particular class, right? They're extraordinarily wealthy, socialite, folks, men who have all of their own agendas that they're bringing to the table, and they're writing their histories in conversation with other histories. And so you can read on Wikipedia somebody being like, oh, well, Cato said that slavery wasn't actually that bad, so it wasn't that bad. It's like, yeah, because Cato had like 200 slaves, right? So just be aware of that when you're out there, if you're doing more research on the stuff we're talking about today or anything else. Just be aware of that. If you look at like the British Museum or other kind of institutions, they're going to have curators who are a little bit less, fan-y, hopefully, and get books and stuff instead just on this particular topic. Okay, end of sidebar. Back to what we were saying. That's all going to be more important in a haptic. Okay, so she's holding a cup. If you're wondering what the cup is full of, you're probably correct when it says full of abominations and the impurity of sexual immorality. That's probably what you think it is. And then upon her forehead is a name written. Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes, the abominations of the earth. We probably should have read in the KJV today. You know, if you're ever going to pull out the good old King James, the Book of Revelation is kind of the place to lean into it. But okay, so we're like, oh, great, it's her name. No, incorrect. So applying some cultural context here, in ancient Rome, the way that you demarcate sex workers out in public is you would put a band on their forehead. And the band on their forehead is not their name, because they're able to tell you that no problem. It's the name of the person who owns the brothel. It's the name of the, of the pimp, of the person who she's in the employ of. And so just that one fact, at least for me, blows open this section, because her name is not Babylon the Great. She is owned by Babylon the Great. She is a slave belonging to the brothel, which is Babylon the Great. And therefore, that other line as well, the mother of prostitutes and the abomination of the earth, that's talking about Babylon, not her. It's the full title of the person who owns this archetypal brothel that we're talking about. And so it's not so much that she is this evil character, but instead she is under the control of the evil empire, right? And so all of a sudden, reading this passage starts to look a little bit different. So prostitutes were slaves. There's two kinds. There's pornes and there's heterai. This section in the Greek over and over and over is going to say pornes, not heterai. A heterai can be a little bit higher class of a person. They're more like a courtesan. They have more like romantic attachment with their client than a pornes does. A pornes is just a slave who gains wealth on behalf of their owner through prostitution, right? And so zooming out on Roman slavery, 20% of the Roman population were slaves. The different figures would comment that they couldn't dress the slaves in a slave uniform, because then when the slaves were out in the public arena, they would see how many of them were slaves and revolt. So they're everywhere. Like we said, they're prisoners of war from military expansion, and then the further generations as we go through time. They would work in mines. There would be hundreds in a single affluent household. And their treatment was pretty much as bad as you can possibly imagine. So it's like, if there were 20% of the population were them, why didn't they rebel more? Deterrence was off the charts. So we have all these little anecdotes written by all of those horrible historians who, don't see them as people, because they weren't thought of as people. They're thought of as being like way less percentage of a person with no ancestor and no progeny. They were listed as equipment when they were planning out their projects, not as employees or workers, but just equipment, like you need lumber, you need slaves. They rampant random violence. They were the victims of all the times. There's stories about like, oh, I was in the baths today and I thought a slave had touched me on the arm. And so I turned around and stabbed him in the eye. But then it turned out to be my friend. Haha, whoops. Like, well, okay. What a great story. Thanks for keeping that one. If you're familiar with Roman art, lots of times the slaves are portrayed in the nude, and we're like, oh, well, I guess like they just had different social norms around nudity. No, they were kept that way as a form of humiliation and coercion into getting them to behave differently. We have these like really long lists of here's how to keep your slaves in line and keep them like as degraded as possible.
And also maybe just like so they couldn't hide weapons in their clothes.
There's that too. Yeah, in fact, Domitian was killed by one of his slaves, which did happen occasionally, although it usually didn't go over well because then they would kill like 500 slaves all at the same time and crucify them in response. But anyway, he was killed by a slave who had his arm in a bandage in order to hide his extra weapon. And he came up to Domitian and was like, oh, I have these tablets that has your assassination plot on it. Quick, you should read. And Domitian was like, oh, no, come to my room. I want to read them. And then he took them, and the slave took out the knife, stabbed him in the groin, and they died. So, you know, what a way to go.
What a way to go. Yeah.
But anyway, we've got lots of stories about feeding slaves to lampreys, kind of for fun, which is a horrible way to die. Very Game of Thrones, giant tanks of poisonous eels, you know. So not great. So if we reread this section with this in mind, she's dressed up a lot. We have accounts of if there was going to be a feast and someone was going to be the object of the attention of the people at the feast, the host would dress up their slave for that role. So that wouldn't have been unusual, and that might explain why they're wearing imperial purple, because of course there weren't a lot of people in the imperial family. There weren't any who were Pornes. There was one who might have been a heteri, but that's probably just slander about, again, those angry politicians being like, she goes down to the brothels and works there on the weekends. Okay, so she's probably dressed up that way on purpose. In fact, there were jewelry laws about how much jewelry women were allowed to wear because Rome is all about controlling women in that particular way, which also, by the way, blows off the doors on some of those passages in the epistles where Peter and Paul are telling women, like, don't braid your hair and don't wear gold and don't wear pearls, which, boy, oh boy, do we like to ignore those passages while we blow up others, you know? Anyway, so those sections are probably talking about don't make trouble in the Roman Empire. Don't attract attention by saying, like, I'm free in Christ to wear whatever I want. And then your household gets punished because you broke the law by dressing too fancy.
Yeah.
Okay, so that could be why she's dressed up. But so she's sitting there. She has this cup, which again is not the product most likely of her own making, but rather other people's fluids. And then it says that she's drunk with the blood of the martyrs, right? Of course, that's of her own accord. Well, I'm very happy if you don't know this, but oftentimes victims are plied with alcohol in order to make things go better for everyone involved.
Sure.
And I think that would have been familiar to the early readers as well. So what's the point then if I'm saying she's not this evil character, those women always out to get you with their cruel seductions? What's the reading? What's the interpretation of this section? I think that God / the angel talking to John / John, right? Everybody who conspired together to write this scroll, are being subversive, and they're using this picture to say, you know who epitomizes Rome, you know who epitomizes Babylon, you know who symbolizes that huge authority power structure in the world. It's not some like majestic eagle or whatever. It's not their incredible Caesar. It's a slave who is in the midst of being abused, right? It's like if a modern prophet was to say, you know what America is? America is this person, and then showed like some kid who's been working in the mines to get the trace minerals to build our phones, right? That would be like, oh, dang. And we'd immediately get it. We would be like, wow, what an evil minor child that must be. No, we would say, oh, no, this is a reflection of the desires, the greed, the materialism, the consumerism that we've been roped into. And they're calling out that the depth of that depravity, right, by utilizing this picture. And so, you know, justice for this poor woman. True story. Once I was in Seattle walking around, and a woman was being carried on a palanquin, which was titled, you know, the name that this woman is usually called. So that was scary.
Oh my goodness.
But that's Seattle ? So she's not this evil figure, and John isn't saying, you know, who the evil empire really is. It's this seductive woman, and you need to watch out for these evil femme fatale characters. It's calling out the slavery and consumption that was so key to Roman life and continues to be so key to our life. We just miss it.
Yes, I do have to quibble. I'm not totally sure that everyone would get it if we saw the picture of the slave boy in the mine, but I think your point stands.
Yeah, okay. Well, sure. If people have eyes to see, they might see it.
Yeah, and I wonder, like, I think to some extent, like, people are just totally oblivious. But I think there's also probably a lot of willful blindness to it. Was that maybe the same sort of thing in Rome, where they kind of understand, but they intentionally ignore it? Or was it they were just so depraved that they just couldn't even see how it was wrong?
I mean, we don't have a lot of early reception history of how did this go over. We only have records of like how Christianity spread or didn't spread in the Roman Empire. And so, you know, women being a big demographic of early Christianity would point to the direction of, well, women got it. And maybe other people were too offended, which Jesus says, blessed are those who are not offended by me, right? So that would be my only link to a guess. Maybe there's a source that I'm not familiar with, but the thing that's really the biggest bummer for me in this passage is that I would hope, if this reading is true, that then Jesus would come in and, you know, free her, and she would join the ranks of the witnesses. But it doesn't say that that's what happens. It says that the beast tears her apart, which is awful, and I think is true about what happens to you know, for instance, like we said, the kids mining those minerals for our phones. It's not like, and then Christianity came to the village and they all were freed, and so I can keep buying my phones because I support a missionary somewhere in Africa. It's like, no, the institution, the system of slavery is still crushing people continually, even as we, you know, try to press kingdom forward. And so I think that's present in that. But we're going to turn our eyes to a happier passage.
Well, before we leave this passage, I did come up with the Marvel reference that I want to use here.
Wonderful.
I'm feeling the Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and I see it and I say, why, Marvel?
Why? Why couldn't you invest in a better diction coach for Benedict Cumberbatch? That's the real question.
Why did he have to have the third eye?
Yeah. Oh, well.
Okay. Revelation 12.
There we go. Revelation 12. Let's see what's going on over here.
Should we do King James?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm a fan. It's moody, you know?
I don't know. We'll see if I can get through this whole chapter.
I believe in you.
All right. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. Verse 1 could fool me. I wouldn't have thought.
There you go.
King James. Mm-hmm. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth, and pained to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child.
Fascinating.
Who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days.
Very specific.
Oh, I love it. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought against his angels, and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan. The devil and Satan.
Yep. Different words.
Which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now is come salvation, and strength, and the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabiters of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman, which brought forth the man-child. And how does this, what does it translate it as? Where is this? Verse 13.
It's the
male
word,
child.
It's arsena, which just means the man.
Okay.
I guess.
And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time, from the face of the serpent. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Well,
is that the last line in the KJV?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow. In the Greek that I'm reading, it then says, and he stood upon the sand of the sea.
Yes. Yes, the NET has verse 18. NIV does not.
Fascinating.
No footnotes saying why it's not there. The testimony, blah, blah, blah. The standard critical texts of the Greek New Testament, NA 28 and UBS 5, both include the sentence as 1218, as do the RSV and NRSV.
There we go. KJV just hates sand.
Other modern translations, like the NASB and the NIV, include the sentence at the beginning of 13:1.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Okay, so it's
a placement issue.
Yeah.
Checks out. Okay, so we could spend like a month plus just working through this, but this series is not called Digging Way Down into Revelation. It's called
Digging Way Down.
It's called The Forgotten Women, right? So we're going to focus on the details that have to do with this woman. So I have coalesced the points, her descriptors, and we'll see what we can see. Okay, so she's clothed with the sun. The moon is beneath her feet. She has a crown of 12 stars about her head. She's in the act of giving birth when we first see her, and a red 7-headed dragon lurks before her with 10 crowns, 7 horns, and a third of the stars. He's waiting to eat her son. However, when the baby arrives, the infant is snatched up to the throne of God. The celestial woman flees into the wilderness where God has prepared a place for her where she might be nourished for a very specific and long amount of time. After a battle between the heavenly forces and the dragon and his angels are thrown to earth. Search ensues for the celestial woman. It's revealed that the woman was gifted with the wings, probably of a vulture, according to our most recent bird scholarship. You know, I like to cause a bird controversy.
What does it say in here? It said it was an eagle?
Of a giant eagle, yes. Insert Lord of the Rings joke here. Okay, so it's unclear whether she gets these wings when she first fled and still remains in the wilderness, or if she's now returning to the wilderness for a second time with the help of the wings. The dragon then becomes an ophis, which means serpent, by the way, before being rendered back to drakon in verse 16, which is fascinating. And as an ophis, he vomits out water so as to overwhelm her, and the earth springs to the aid of the woman and swallows the torrent. Angry, the drakon leaves to search out her children. Okay, so who have you heard this lady is?
I don't think I've ever heard anything other than Mary.
Okay. I think like the OG Marty material has more.
Well, okay. Prior to Bema, I mean.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Outside of Bema.
So you're right. The Catholics follow the church father Epiphanius and say it's Mary. She flees into the wilderness after the birth of her son. Right? She goes to Egypt.
Is Egypt considered the wilderness?
Yeah, totally. I mean, wilderness is really just the word desert. So Egypt has lots of desert.
Okay.
The Protestants, of course, aren't excited about that. And so they follow the church father Hippolytus and they say, no. It's actually the church. And the kid is the martyrs, right? Because they're being pursued by Satan. That's a little bit interesting because, of course, there's a third woman in Revelation, the Nymphe, the bride of Christ, who is definitely called the church. And so it's like, okay, we don't have 3 distinct figures if you try to follow that one, but I'm not totally against it. I've also heard people say that she, scholars, not just random folks on the street, that she is the Mashiach, that she's the Messiah, and the kid is her church, which is very interesting. And I've heard Mr. Shlomo himself say that she's Eve, Chava, fighting a dragon, which I love. So there's lots of voices at the table with great ideas. The word is living and active, partially because there are so many good, fresh perspectives, people with the spirit within them, bringing good stuff to the text. So I'm going to put out an idea, again, based on the premise that I think that details mean something. And the Holy Spirit wasn't just like, okay, I'm going to close my eyes and think of something really pretty and cool. Write it down. So many stars. But that, again, it would have meant something to the original listeners of the text. Okay. So the celestial woman is adorned with the sun, moon, and stars. Fascinating. So I'm going to argue very specifically that this woman is representing Isis. Bum, 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 ba-da-bum. And not because God's people were expected to worship Isis or believe that Isis is a real goddess that is supposed to be worshipped, but rather that John and the Spirit are borrowing cultural touchstones that would have been extremely familiar. Isis, of course, spread from Egypt, but there was a lot of syncretism around the Mediterranean in the 1st and 2nd century. And her cult was huge in Rome. Egypt was like really admired as like the jewel of the world in some ways. Cleopatra VII, the famous one, is extraordinarily wealthy. And so the Romans, who liked to borrow everybody's gods, right? They stole the Greek gods. They also stole Turkey's gods. They also stole Egyptian gods. So this figure was known all over the Mediterranean. You can find little temples to Isis in unexpected areas all over. Okay, so why do I go with Isis? Well, let's see. So if she's adorned with the sun, moon, and stars, Apuleius, 2nd century BC, is a novelist. He wrote this famous, very entertaining novel called The Golden Ass. Here for it. You laughed, so you're the immature one, not me.
I laughed because you're here for it.
Okay, fine. Anyway, so in that book, the protagonist has been transformed into a donkey. He meets Isis, and she's wearing a black robe embroidered with glittering stars around a full moon. So here's the primary source. We love primary sources. So here's what Apuleius says. Just above her brow was a disc in the form of a mirror resembling the light of the moon. In one of her hands she bore serpents and the other blades of corn. Her robe was of fine silk, shimmering in diverse colors, sometimes yellow, sometimes rose, sometimes flamey. I love that. That's probably orange. They didn't have a good word for orange until post-medieval era. And sometimes, which sore troubled my spirit, dark and obscure. Here and there the stars peeked out, and in the middle of them was placed the moon, which shone like a flame of fire. So that sounds relatively familiar, right, compared to our text?
Yes.
Yes, very good. Okay. So,
by the way, I'm going to link the Wikipedia page for Isis. We talked about it back in episode 300. But my instinct is not to think of I guess you said it's a cult?
Yeah.
Or the specific god is named Isis.
Yeah. Okay, so why else do I think that this woman is supposed to represent Isis? Here's why. Her great nemesis, who forces Isis to flee into the wilderness, is also a fiery, many-headed dragon. So building our case here, his name is Typhon in the Greek pantheon, and he's based on the Egyptian god Set. And Hesiod's Theogony describes Typhon in the following way. Earth bore her youngest child Typhon of the love of Tartarus by the aid of golden Aphrodite. Strength was with his hands in all that he did, and the feet of the strong god were untiring. From his shoulders grew 100 heads, grew 100 heads of a snake, a fearful dragon with dark flickering tongues, and from under the brows of his eyes and his marvelous heads flashed fire, and fire burned from his heads as he glared. We've even got more opportunities for Marvel jokes, right? So in the myth of Isis hears that Typhon, this many-headed dragon, has deceived her love, Osiris, by locking him in a chest. And he throws that chest into the Nile. Bummer. So after questing for this chest for quite some time, Isis discovers that the chest was cast out of the water into a tree in Byblos, which is not actually Babylon. It's in the Levant, so don't get too excited there. But the tree has grown up around the chest and Osiris and is now a pillar in the house of the king. So Isis disguises herself as a wet nurse, might remind us of Yocheved in the Moshe story, right?
Yes.
But she disguises herself as a wet nurse in the house of the king, and she grows wings, ding, 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 as she mourns the dead Osiris. She is able to free his body from the tree, phew, what a relief, and consequently gives birth to a premature and weak baby Horus. Like the celestial woman, she immediately hides her child to the east of Alexandria. So again, desert. And in her absence, Typhon finds the body of Osiris and he cuts him into 14 pieces and scatters him in the delta. Isis sails through the marshes in a papyrus boat to try to find Osiris's pieces, and she utilizes her magical powers to raise him back from the underworld. He rises again and begins to train Horus to defeat Typhon. Okay, so similarities here. Isis is similar in appearance to the celestial woman of Revelations 12. They both face danger from a draconic monster, although neither of them face off with the monster themselves with any active aggression, right? We don't see like her pull out a giant sword in Revelation 12, except to Michael.
Right.
Both give birth to children without the immediate presence or participation of a man, right? It does, which you can read more about the Isis myth there. I do not feel like getting into it. It's gross in the myth. But both abandon the child with the sense that the child is in danger from the snake-like beast, which is pretty maternal instinct. But both inhabit the wilderness in an interim season and are briefly winged. And in both stories, water is a tool of the chaotic nemesis who frustrates the aims of the women. In neither story do the women do anything about the continued actions of the antagonist or about the water, but they make their way forward regardless. Okay, so again, John is not hoping that we worship these pagan figures. I don't think that's why she's in the text, but he's calling on the relevant, noble, majestic, supernatural imagery for a reason. And he's placing Isis here on the good side of the oppressed early Christians. So why might that be?
Do you want me to have an answer?
If you have an answer, I'm curious to hear it.
I don't.
You don't have to. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so why has he put them here? Well, the first idea would be what I already mentioned. John is motivated, and God, of course, through him, is motivated in the same way that Jesus was, to convince his people not to become agents of political violence. Right? That temptation was always there for the Jewish people and then for the oppressed Christian minority, that if I could just go murder the emperor, everything would be better. Right? If I could just overthrow this governor, we wouldn't be persecuted so much. Guys, I could save everybody. I could accomplish such a great thing if we just, call on our zealot ancestry here a little bit and, reclaim the seat of power and the seat of government for the Christian people. Doesn't it all resound in our particular era, right? And so I think that's potentially a first reason that John loops this figure in, because she doesn't take on Satan herself, the Diabolos, the dragon. Instead, it's a spiritual battle, right? Paul says we don't battle against flesh and blood, but the spiritual forces, and that's how we're supposed to engage with them, not by, stowing aboard a ship, sneaking into Rome, trying to stab somebody. That's what Empire does, and that's how they overthrow themselves all the time. They'll take care of it.
Well, and I like that statement, like the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent.
That old serpent.
Like, sure, it's a different person this time. It's a different, it's a different pagan god. It's a different empire. It's a different, but it's the same thing that we've experienced this whole time.
Through the ages. But I'm going to also say, alongside that point, that he's pulling on Isis for a very specific reason. Isis was a mom, right? So she has Horus. And this is a big deal because we think of our top Greek gods. We've got goddesses. We've got Aphrodite, who's love. We've got Artemis, who's not, very familial figure. She's not at all. We've got Hera, who's kind of like the evil mom, right? We've got Athena. Emphasis certainly is not on family for her. And so for a lot of average women in the Roman Empire, you don't feel like Aphrodite most days, most likely. You're looking for someone who's more like Demeter, right? More like a maternal goddess figure. And so that was one of the reasons Isis became so popular. She was faithful to her husband, right? Even after he died, she went and sought him out. She wasn't just like, oh, I guess I'll go marry someone new. She went and pursued him and rescued him and had a child and saved her child, right? So she's much easier to connect to, the academics theorize, than maybe Athena advising people on the battlefield does on a daily basis. And so from our mainstream, perhaps evangelical background, motherhood is a very expected part of women's life. And so hearing like, oh, there's a mom included, it's like, well, sure, that's what women are supposed to be doing. But despite the various conflicts over sexual ethics that we have today, the early Christian world and the biblical world of the epistles in the first and second century was highly occupied with a different set of questions about sexual ethics than we are today. So what were they all jacked up about back then, Brent? What is Paul always chipping in his opinion, his 2 cents on?
And sexual immorality in general.
That was a part of it, right? Because Roman culture was very strong, which had all sorts of, wild festivals and all the Roman stuff. But Paul chips in all the time to say, look, if it was up to me, you wouldn't
get married.
Right. You wouldn't get married. The main conflict in early Christianity about sexual ethics, everybody agreed you weren't supposed to be going to orgies and committing bestiality and everything. But the thing that they were arguing about was whether marriage is okay at all, which again is pretty divorce from our modern idea about what they were really concerned about. So we have all these stories in the early church accounts of women throwing off their engagements so that they were free to go preach the gospel. A super common thing would be that a woman is betrothed to some nasty Roman or a perfectly fine Roman, but she tells her father, no, I'm not going to marry him. And so she gets thrown in the Colosseum or in jail because she's not submitting to the will of her father. Again, in Roman Empire, fathers had the power to kill their kids whenever they wanted. And it wasn't thought of as murder. It was, just private business. Ugh. Yeah. Which also, by the way, illuminates, we think of like honor killings as like a very Middle Eastern, bad thing, but it was very Roman. So one of the early...
Apparently all the way up into Britannia based on your accent.
Everybody fussy has like the Queen's English. We know this. Come on. The Acts of Paul, and not a good accent, by the way. The Acts of Paul and Thecla is a pretty famous early account, which talks about Paul and his disciple, kind of. It's someone who wants to become a missionary alongside him, Thecla. And that exact thing happens to her. And she says, no, I'm not going to marry this guy that I'm supposed to marry because I need to be free to preach the gospel. And that's the problem is Roman marriage was a very narrow, confining, ownership-based relationship. And so the idea that you could both be married and go and spread kingdom is antithetical to their idea of what marriage is, because to be married means in the Roman household codes to be upholding the dignity and the business of your man, the end, period. And so the idea that you could go and do something else was radical. And so in the early church for women, it was like, well, of course I'm not going to be married if I'm going to go do anything. Right. One of the words, which I'm not going to try to pronounce, SYZG, any guesses, for missionary pairs is the same word that gets used for gladiatorial pairs, right? That doesn't seem very domestic. But these women who would go out, as we looked in our last episode, and pairs of men and male and female pairs, God calls them gladiatorial pairs, which is, again, the subversive rather than violence. What do? We use our words to spread good news. So this is the big struggle. And in the Acts of Paul and Thecla, it doesn't have a happy ending-ish. She goes to the Colosseum and it says that she like transforms into a man before she gets eaten by I think it's an animal in the Colosseum. And that was because, again, their ideas of womanhood were so narrow and confining that like to be brave was to be a man. We have that in lots of other early accounts of Jesus's teachings, like when it's not Andrew, it's Peter. Peter's always yelling at like Mary Magdalene in these early accounts and being like, why is she here? Why is she allowed to teach? And Andrew will say, if Jesus has said that she's allowed to be here, then who are you to say anything else? But then sometimes Jesus will give a teaching like women are actually like men, which to us is like, what are you even talking about? But within their worldview, again, to be a woman was to be less than a person. And so if Jesus is affirming the personhood of women, in these cultural accounts, right? They're not in the Bible, probably for a good reason. But so in these cultural accounts, Jesus is saying that to have personhood, to have agencies, is to be a man. And so in the midst of all of this milieu of people saying, no, I don't want to get married, and people saying that marriage isn't good, right? We have this in Catholicism through the monastic movement for a long time, right? Even continuing until now, although we'll see if Pope Francis makes any more earthquakes over there. It's always fun to see what he's up to. But Isis then is being harnessed by John to see, look, here is a powerful woman, an effective woman, a heroine in this story who is able to rescue her spouse, save her child from being eaten by the dragon, right? She is a maternal character. She is able to maybe not kill Satan by herself, sure. She's able to protect her family, to survive, to put up a fight, to stay alive as a faithful woman practicing fidelity within her marriage and love for her kids, right? And so he brings in this household domestic character to say, just because you're married, just because you have a husband, just because you have kids, doesn't mean that you're cut out of the work of kingdom coming, right? The work of pushing back against the darkness, the spiritual forces, against Satan. Moms, too, have a role to play. Their work is still glorious, even if they're not taking on Typhon directly. They might feel like Elijah under the bush or in the cave, trying to run and stay alive in the midst of persecution, right? Because he's the character before Jesus who goes out in the desert like Moshe, and he gets ministered to by angels and provided for out there. So in the midst of your desert, moms, or wives who might not feel like their work is central to kingdom, John still says that there is work to do and power and authority that is still palpable in even that setting when we ally ourselves with God, right? When we partner with him. And so how nice in this whole series, we've had these different women who are extraordinary in different ways, who are off doing things. They're heralds. They're, they're rallying the troops like Arsinoe. They're being Deborah. They're being bards and sages and doing all these things. Here, at the very end, we have John and God, of course, through him saying, what also is beautiful and good is the work of domesticity, the work of raising kids, the work of being a wife. And they're included in the work of kingdom coming.
And would the crown of 12 stars be the 12 tribes and like
that would be a book that you should write.
A book probably not that much.
I mean, there are so many different symbols all through this, the number of days that she's out there that I'm just not equipped to talk about.
Sure.
The thing that I pointed out about the stars is she's dressed the same way Isis is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I was just thinking like whatever she does as a mother, like that is also like what the children she raises, like what they go on to do.
Right.
She is crowned with their achievements as well, like as the one who like enabled them to
raise
whatever.
them. Right.
So, yeah, but yeah, there's an infinite amount of symbolism to explore potentially, but I will not be writing a book for the record. At least not about that. It's probably the last book I would want to write.
What's the first book?
I have no idea, but it's not going to be this.
Well, sign me up. I look forward to it someday. They would be called Putting Up with Marty, Josh, Reed, and Elle. A diary from my time. Podcast.
Yeah, maybe I will write a memoir.
Oh dear.
That seems far more likely. Okay, well, that's the series then.
That's the series.
The anthology.
The anthology. So many women who we didn't have time to celebrate and to learn from, but we did our best for this particular moment in this particular season.
Yes.
Maybe we'll have a season 2 of Forgotten Women at some point.
Perhaps. Okay. Well, you can get a hold of Elle at lgroverfricks@gmail.com. And you can get a hold of me at BayamaCohost@gmail.com. And Marty doesn't need any email, so I'm sure you'll find him if you really need to.
Find him in person on his tour.
Yes. Okay, so go to BayamaSnapshot.com. We got a couple items in the show notes today, but I think it was the first episode. Elle, you gave some book recommendations, so if you want to...
Oh, man. Yeah, the book recommendations list on women in the Bible is extremely long. It's not like we're just pulling from one or two authors, but this week I just said read books. I didn't say which ones.
Yes, there were one or two books that I think you recommended in the first episode. So anyway,
great.
Plenty of options to dig into if you want to go further. And then, we'll be back soon with
Josh.
Yes, well, we'd have one other episode standalone in between, but then Josh will be back with the Tabernacle. So.
Well, I'm excited about the Tabernacle.
All right. Thanks for joining us on the Bama Podcast. We'll talk to you again soon.
Bye.